Përshëndetje njerëz. Këtë episod të Llafe të Lira ju asjellim drejt për drejt nga Londra. Patëm mundësinë të flasim me profesoreshën MUKULIKA BANERJEE nga Departamenti i Antropologjisë në Universitetin London School of Economics and Political Science. Profesoresha MUKULIKA BANERJEE është një studiuese e antropologjisë së politikës, e cila specializohet posaçërisht në studimin e demokracisë, mënyrës se si ajo funksionon dhe sigurisht të zgjedhjeve, pra të implementimit të drejtave demokratike. Ky vit ka qenë një vit interesant sa i përket zgjedhjeve, mbi 50 shtete të ndryshme të botës kanë shkuar në vendvotime gjatë këtij viti dhe me profesoreshën patëm mundësinë të flasim për implikimet që ky vit ka pasur në politikat botërore. Ndiqni Llafe të Lira, ky episodi në vijim është në gjuhën angleze, sigurisht, megjithatë shpresoj që ta shihoni njësoj si episodet tona të tjera. Bëjni like, share, subscribe, koment dhe jini në rrjedha me gjitha gjërat të cilat postojmë, për shkak se besojmë se kjo është vetëm një nga disa episoda që do t'i postojmë këtu nga Londra. Llafe të Lira për mendje të lira. Shijojeni episodin deri në fund. Mirupafshim. Professor, it's very nice to have you on my podcast. First, I want to start with something regarding your profession, right? You're a professor at the Department of Anthropology. A lot of people, when they think about anthropology, they tend to think of people just going and visiting faraway places just to study the people there and the culture that those people have. But in the modern world, why is anthropology important? And is it at all important?
It's very important. I think it's, we say it's the most humanist of the social sciences and the most scientific of the humanities. By which we mean that it is the most scientific of the humanities because it scientifically investigates a new culture, a society, whichever, at home. You can do an anthropology of a community in London. You can go to Albania. I study paddy farmers in India. I study amongst them. But you collect evidence systematically, right? So it's not impressionistic, like a travel writer or a journalist going in and out. That's number one. Number two, it's sustained. So it's for a very long period of time. Our doctoral research, for instance, when our PhD students go out, they have to live in a place for 18 months because we know there are some things that happen just once a year and you need to be there for an annual cycle and a bit more because the first time it happens, you don't realize its significance. You need to see it again the second time. It's, most life in most societies, whether in agricultural life or indeed anywhere else, the calendar year, different parts of the year, different things happen. So it's sustained. And thirdly, and very critically, this is something only anthropologists do, it is immersive. So when you are doing research, you're not just going there to ask questions and come away. When you're there for 18 months, you are there as a participant observer. You're there to become part of that society, find a role for yourself, help, do whatever, you fit in. But you also observe, and this is unique to anthropology, and this is unique to the ethnographic method, as we call it. Ethnographic method doesn't just mean qualitative research. It means that you don't always ask people questions because you learn a lot about anywhere and any people by observing what is going on. So you've got to be quiet. You've got to watch what people are doing. Because often when you ask somebody a question, they will give you an answer that they feel like giving that day, or they feel you want to hear them say it, or they want to present themselves in a particular way. And that might not be what they actually would do in practice or really think. So you have to be there after they've given you the answer and see what they really do. Not because people lie, but because people, have different reasons for giving different answers at different points. So that's what makes, I think the knowledge that an anthropologist produces generates insight, I would say, in a way that is quite unique. And you can ask, even though you study a community, a place. I was in a village these two villages that were next to each other. 15 years I kept going back. That was a bit extreme. But that was also, I didn't live there for 15 years. Over 15 years, I kept going back every year. But this is something that only anthropologists do. We get to know these places really well. But when we are writing about really big concerns, big issues. We are writing about precarity, or we are writing about care, or like I have been really questioning democratic theory itself on the basis of what I've learned from a bunch of illiterate paddy farmers, because they are Democrats. They are citizens living in a democracy. They have ideas. They practice it. And there are ways of asking questions of what we think we know about democracy by looking at what we have learned from a small place like a village. So as an anthropologist who has just passed away, Thomas Erickson, he has a wonderful book called Small Places, Big Issues. That's anthropology.
Your latest book is based, right, on this research on these democratic farmers in India. And it's titled Cultivating Democracy. Why have you titled this book in this specific way, right? Because it is a play of words in some sense, right? Because these farmers, they cultivate the soil, they cultivate the plants that they use for food or whatever, and then we also need to cultivate democracy. What do you mean by that?
So I think the first thing about the argument is that democracy is twofold. You need an institutional form of democracy by which you recognize it to be a democratic country. Right? So you say X country is democratic because it has a free press, it has separation of powers between the executive, legislature, judiciary, it holds free and fair elections. There is an institutional form of democracy which should be recognizable. But equally importantly, this institutional form exists to create a kind of society which is democratic. There has to be democratic culture. And those norms of social conduct which create democratic culture exist well beyond elections are over. Right? Now, my argument is to emphasize the fact it's not brand new, but it is certainly something we've forgotten in the discussions of democracy and its overemphasis on its institutional forms, is that democracy lasts and thrives and flourishes only if each of us as citizens continues to remain active throughout the term of a government. So we think our duty as a citizen in a democratic country is to go and vote. Excellent, we should vote. But once you've voted, you can't then just forget about your duties as a citizen and say, okay, I've elected my representative, this prime minister or president's going to run the country, it's their job. Yes, it's their job, but our job continues as citizens to remain active, to hold them to account, because transparency and accountability are essential to democratic practice and norms. This process of active citizenship, I say, is really a process of cultivation. You need to cultivate the opposite of active citizenship and cultivation of democracy is complacency. And I dare say that's what we've seen in the world. We've all said, oh, these are democratic countries, those are non-democratic countries. Democracies are superior and they're going to last forever. We can now go on and make money or raise our children or whatever else people choose to do rather than keep an eye on their governments and ask them difficult questions. So that complacency has, I think, brought the kind of backsliding we are seeing everywhere. And it is a play on words. You're quite right, illiterate. It's in order to exemplify what this process of cultivation should be for an active citizen, I think the cue can be taken from the farmers, because when you watch farming, anyone who's seen the farming of a crop knows what? That a farmer does not take days off. They don't say, oh, today's Sunday, I'm going to have a lie and I'm not going to go and open the water pipe to flood the field with, Or, oh, I see that there is some kind of pest growing, but I'll leave it another 2 days and, I'll come back with the fertilizer next day or the pesticide. That's just not how farming works. You've got to do it you've got to be committed, you've got to do it every day, you've got to care. So I've sort of put this whole activity into 4 words. I think cultivation is about hard work. You really have to do the work. You've got to put in the hours. It's about patience because the rewards are not immediate. If you've grown anything, even a plant on your windowsill, you know that you can't go buy a plant and then expect it to put out flowers the next day. You've got to wait. And you've got to do all the right things in the meanwhile. Work hard, make sure the sun, water, everything is right, temperature. And then maybe 6 months later, it'll put out some flowers. The third is you've got to remain vigilant. You've got to check. Every day you've got to check. Is it looking dry? Is it looking sad? Is it looking like it's got enough light? And finally, you also have to have hope. You can't do this with a sense of, oh goodness, I've got to, water the plant again. You've got to do it thinking, if I water the plant, it will give me flowers. And I think this is kind of what I mean about active citizenship and democratic practice, is that if we learn from the farmers, we learn what the practice of cultivation is. And one additional point I'll make on this is that in order to cultivate anything, democracy or paddy, it requires a certain self-cultivation first. You've got to make yourself a certain kind of person. Right? It's like, many people don't farm or look after plants. Many people exercise. If you want to be a fit person, it's not something that you can do overnight, right? We know that. You've got to put in the hours every single day. And you've got to be vigilant, you've got to keep doing it, and only then will you get the results. So it's that sense of temporality and patience that I'm trying to capture. And I dare say what we are witnessing, and especially this year, what we've witnessed in the world, is a certain impatience and a certain lack of care for the democratic project.
I was just, these last couple of days, I was looking through Twitter a bit more often than usual, because I don't like going into Twitter a lot. But these days, I don't know why. And I was looking, there's like this thing going on in the US with some bill that Congress is trying to pass, and with all the political atmosphere in the US right now. And then I look at the comments of those people, like a lot of people there. Like, oh, get rid of the government, shut the government until Trump comes into power, don't do anything until he comes into power on the 20th of January, etc., etc. And I was thinking, these people that at the same time are somehow fighting, right, for this idea of like a free government, a very democratic government, because that's what they're saying, right? They're also saying these very anti-institutional things. They're having this very anti-institutional rhetoric, So I don't know. I have a feeling that somehow, and I don't know if you share the same thought with me, but I have this feeling that somehow this last couple of years, this idea of democracy is also being used negatively to insert very radical ideas into the mainstream. What do you think about this?
Yeah,
is this the case with the US, for example, or no?
I think it is. It's more stark in the US, and I share, and it's an interesting observation you make, and I've been thinking about it too. I think it is an impatience, rejection of slow, cautious government that's about regulations, that's about welfare delivery. People, for whatever reason, whether they're right or wrong, there seems to be an appetite all over the world, not just in the US, that government or governance as we knew it just takes too long. We need a disruptor. We need somebody like Trump who's just going to clean up, he's going to drain the swamp, he's going to get rid of government as we know it, and he's going to be decisive and put in place regulations or no regulations so that the free market spirit can flourish. And you think, what are people exactly impatient about? Is it that they just don't want governments to be scrutinized and do things carefully? Or, to be perfectly honest, I think we've got to also admit to the fact that governance, as it has been, as people have tried to do, as governments have been ruling, simply has not delivered enough change that people want to see. They don't want their grocery bills to be high. They don't want regulations to stop building of infrastructure. They don't want so many health and safety regulations that children can't be given fresh fruit in nurseries because you don't know who's cutting the fruit. You know, from small to big regulations, there's been an over-regulated state, as it's seen by people. So what Trump is proposing in the US, or what people expect Trump to be doing, whether it's going to happen, we're going to see. He has set up a whole new department of, what's it called? Doge, right?
Doge, yes.
Of
government efficiency.
Efficiency. Yes. And the idea of efficiency is not that we're going to do things better, we're just going to do them so differently and we're going to get rid of the way we used to do it in the past. And people are getting behind that idea because they're saying, well, why don't we try something different? Because it's not as if the old system made us all richer or allowed more freedom. So let's try and have a different system. And I deeply worry about that because the appetite for that, I mean, look who's heading up Doge. The richest men in the world who have never really run anything apart from their own corporations, obviously. But running a corporation and running a country are very, very different things. And the government may look like a corporation and absolutely has a lot to learn from corporations. But the outcome of a corporation, ultimately a corporation is working to generate profit for shareholders. That's their job, right? That's not what a government is about. The government is there to run a country, to ensure that each citizen has access to their rights, is able to exercise their rights. They're very different projects. So efficiency in a democratic project really would be to enable people to live to their full capabilities, but not put undue obstacles in the way. But there's no question of making government profitable. Yes, it may seem wasteful to a lot of people. The budget of the US government runs in the trillions. I mean, this is a big operation. It's true. I'm sure there are cuts and efficiency streamlining that can be done. But the equation of economic activity with governance, you know, which is what is happening with the appointment of Elon Musk, is deeply worrying.
Yeah, that's the thing in my eyes also. I have this feeling that America somehow is an oligarchy more than a democratic republic per se. You know, that's my view. Also, the idea of lobbying, of having, like, you literally have lobbyists, which are people that give money to just to affect policies in the country.
Yeah.
So I don't know how this.
And that's always been the case, isn't it, Ilir? That lobbying in the US, I have always, you know, coming from India, and, you know, India, countries in the global south are accused, Africa, they are said to have corruption. So there's corruption in the global south, but lobbying in America. And to me, they look remarkably the same.
Very similar.
And as our anthropology has shown, you know, the moral economy, there's a moral economy to corruption cultures in many parts of the world, which is really redistributive. Or it is about mutuality. Come on, you know, if you were doing well and we were in school together and you helped me get a permit, that's friendship. That's not corruption. You know, that's the way people would generate it. And fair enough, we can say, well, no, you know, you're a public servant, you've got to work for the public good. But lobbying, like you say, is exactly, you've institutionalized it. You've institutionalized it to the point that you've made it opaque and you've made it disappear. You don't see it anymore.
They don't even mention it.
Yeah, they don't. But yet policies and laws and legislation are being formed on the basis of who's given the money to parties. Now, at the heart of this, you know, thinking about the democratic project, it does. I've been a huge watcher of elections always, but it does make me think, and, you know, a great admirer of elections. A free and fair election is a good thing. It allows expression of citizenship. But the money that is involved in an election, a lot of this is, a lot of the economic interest coming into this space, what you're saying about oligarchs, we've seen the extreme of that now, is really why do you need so much economic backing to be in politics?
Exactly.
Right? It's the cost of an election.
Exactly.
So look at the US election. 7-8 billion are spent. Where did the money get spent? It's mostly for advertising. Who's making that money? It's not politicians, and it's not ordinary citizens. It's people who own media, right? Who own technology. So in a weird way, democracy becomes a way to circulate the money within the economy. It has nothing to do with politics. And that's very different, say, for instance, what happens in India, where, poor voters will say, well, we like elections because we get a lot of stuff. It doesn't affect our vote. You can't buy our vote with, giving me a sari here or kerosene there. But at least we get stuff. There's a sort of redistributive moment. It's like a potlatch. There's a lot of spending and people get... But in the US, it doesn't work like that. And now, I think in any country, we should be suspicious when, in the last week, as we've seen, every single billionaire, people like Bezos and Zuckerberg, who hadn't been in the first round of billionaires going for Trump, have all come round. They've all put in their money. And they are all extremely successful, extremely shrewd businessmen. Businessmen don't put their money somewhere unless they think they make returns.
They're going to win.
And they are, like you say, that's what an oligarchy is. A club of rich people pretending to run the country, but really using the political process to serve their economic interests.
When it comes to, this year has been a big year for democracy, and I think it has tested the democratic institutions around the world. And I think it's going to be very interesting the following 4 or 5 years when these elections, they come into practice, right? When people start, I think it's going to be an interesting couple of years for democracy. What are your main takes from all these elections that have happened around the world? If I'm not mistaken, it was 2/3 of the world that had elections, something like that. It was a huge number. This year it was crazy.
Over 50 elections.
Over 50 elections, which is a very big number and some of the biggest democracies in the world.
Yes.
So what do you think about these results from these elections this year? What can we expect? Are there some new shifts happening around regarding democracy or maybe even generally political power around the world?
See, I think one trend, which especially when people look at, say, Euro-America, they see evidence of what they're calling anti-incumbency, which is you don't like the government that's in power, you want change. So a lot of governments, political parties that were in power have been thrown out. This happened in the UK, it happened in the US, and it's happened in many other contexts as well. In other parts, it's been less so. So, it's been a mixed bag, but there has been a lot of sitting governments have lost the mandate, which to me means two things. One is the obvious, which is they didn't like the way that that political party ran. They didn't like the Democrats. They didn't like Biden's administration. They wanted Trump. Or in Britain, where we are sitting, they didn't like the Conservatives. They'd been in power 13 years. They said, now, time for a change. We prefer a Labour government. So it is about the political party and its record. And this is the beauty of democratic transitions, is that you do it peacefully through the ballot box. You change governments. There's no coups. There are no civil wars. You can change governments like this, which is why elections are so important. At the same time, I think there's a second message that is also coming through, which is what I was saying earlier, that people are not happy with how democratic politics, and perhaps in particular liberal democratic politics, liberal democracy and its understanding of rights, of citizens, of citizenship, there is a backlash towards that, which wants people, which has led people, I think, to throw out incumbent governments, but really hoping to replace those existing governments, not just with a different government, but with a different kind of politics altogether. That is less worried about rights, much more about generating, reviving the economy, about making things good. And even if that means it comes at the cost of the rights of minorities, say, which is one of the keystones of the liberal democratic project, is to make sure that even though elections are a game of numbers, it is not majoritarianism. It's not the rule by majority. It's a numbers game, but it is a regime that comes into power that is truly representative of the electorate, one of its main functions and duties is to make sure that minorities are looked after well, whoever they are, in whichever country. That project seems to be under challenge in a number of places. So India, which I study very closely, has been ruled by right-wing Hindu majoritarian government, and this is how they define themselves. Their ideology is of Hindutva, which is a political, it's not about Hinduism, it's about majoritarian politics where Hindus, being to 80% of the population, should set the terms of what India's constitutional morality should be. It goes against the grain of India's constitution, which is meant to be secular and diverse and respectful of its minorities. But there are enough people voting for that kind of majoritarian politics. They've been doing it. Mr. Modi's been in power for more than 10 years now. Interestingly, he lost his majority in the Indian elections this year. That's a sixth of the world's electorate. It lives in India. And people gave him a much more cautious verdict. They didn't give him a, and it has ruined him. He's pretending like he's won a majority, but if you look at the legislation that they would like to pass through, they're not able to pass through because they don't have the numbers in Parliament. Elsewhere too, whether it is Donald Trump labeling all of Biden and the Democrats' politics as wokeism, right? Which is somehow, what is wokeism? You think what they're calling woke is basically a politics that says everybody matters. Everybody's rights are equally important, whether defined by race or sexuality or gender or class, right? And that's pretty germane to the liberal democratic project. But it's all been labeled as, that's all they care about, whether gender diverse people have rights. No, it's not just about that. Gender diversity is just one element of minority rights. But there is somehow a push that we have the numbers, the majority is going to set the agenda, and the rest can go hang themselves. And this is, I think, in many ways present in multiple national contexts. There are exceptions. I think Sri Lanka is a very interesting exception. But this is it's certainly happening in Europe. So when we keep talking about the rise of right-wing politics in Europe, if you look at the content of that right-wing politics, it is a dissatisfaction and disaffection with how politics as usual is done. But it's also about immigration. It's so loud. And what is immigration about, if not about the rights of minorities? And a complete lack of recognition and acknowledgement of how important those immigrants are to run European economies. Without that, they just, collapse. But it's a sort of it's a refusal to understand how an economy works, which would lead you to be more sensible about these issues and just take very strong stands, creating a politics of hate, which is very easy to get numbers behind. People, you can get behind hate. It's so easy to hate something. It's much harder to build something or cultivate.
To think about something.
Or to think something. And thinking, as causes discomfort. It causes doubt. And that's what universities are for. That's what we train you and other students to do.
It was very interesting because we were studying all these during the course in political anthropology, we're studying all these papers about how actually so much of the economy of some of the biggest countries in the world, they're based on migrant labor, right? And what these countries do, these institutions do, it's very interesting. They keep these people in a precarious situation all the time. So they're always in some way, they're stuck in this limbo of not being able to really integrate fully
Yes.
into society, but at the same time work enough, like work there so they can manage the basic level of
Survival. Yeah.
survival that needs to be done also for the economy of that country. Um, but this is a very interesting viewpoint. The idea that now hate is, and I think hate would in this case would be a reaction to this what you mentioned earlier, this slow democracy, um, this very bureaucratic maybe process. But I don't know if you saw what. Also, I'll go back to Elon Musk again because it's a very interesting figure for me, and that emerged politically this couple of months. He mentioned in a tweet a couple of weeks ago, I think, right, that if one of the GOP congressmen do not agree with an idea or with a new legislation that Trump wants to put into government, he's going to invest money to get them out of their office, you know, to run campaigns to get them out of their office, and to like get this bill passed, you know, because he won the majority vote, right? Because he did win it, but by a slight difference. They want to sell it like it's this huge majority or whatever. So, very, very, very interesting how these things are developing right now. And I think, do you think that democracy, in the way that it has worked so far, do you think it can survive as a democracy in the future if it continues being like it is now?
No, I don't think. I mean, that's the short answer. We really need to think very hard, and I don't think we can think about the reform or the survival of democracy without providing a really serious critique of capitalism and late capitalism and how it's working. You know, we isolate the problem and make it sound like it's all about politics, but actually, like you were saying at the start, that start of this comment, that the politics, national governments really exist to create a precarious immigration system in order to create a precarious labor force that will service a late capitalist economy, which requires cheap labor that has no rights. And the government's job, it's a labor broker. It has ambiguous legislation around immigration all the time and keeps changing the rules so that, like you were saying, people never settle and can never have union rights, can never bargain for better livelihoods and so on. And governments, therefore, exist almost entirely not just to enable economic activity, which it should, of course, that's how societies work, but to actively support a certain kind of capitalist activity, which is exploitative, to put it very simply. And this is, again, I think you're right to look at Musk as a figure, because it's not just, we're not talking about just a businessman. We're talking about a businessman who's built his business in a very particular way with him as the center of the story. That's not how democracy works. Democracy is precisely about deliberation, argumentation, consensus building. So, if there is one person who doesn't agree with your legislation, what do? You don't try and get rid of them. You would try and persuade them. You would try and see if you can get other people who are slightly more persuaded to talk to them, try and sell your idea. You would persuade, right? And at the end of the day, you hope, that's why in the past politicians have spent a lot of their time making sure they have enough votes on the Hill to get their legislations through. But this is just like my way or the highway. You don't agree with this, you lose your job. You can do that in a company if you're the boss. But democracy is not about a boss. It is about a prime minister or the head of state or president is there to embody a popular will that is collective. That is their job. It's not about what they want to do. So there is a. So I really, and I don't know, Eli, I don't think we talk enough about what democracy, what its essence is. That it is about consensus building, that it's about deliberation, that is about accommodation of a variety of different views in order to find the best possible solution, which might not be the perfect solution, but at least everybody is part of it. There is a collective stake in the way that you choose to run this or that. That is what makes it democratic. And that essence, we don't really talk about it. We've kind of reduced our discussions of democracy to elections. And this is what happens, that we don't spend enough time. So when we see even a public critique of Musk is inchoate at the moment, because we know it's not right, but we don't know how to make it sound like a criticism. We don't know what to criticize exactly.
And I do not want to end on a very negative note, right? On this idea that democracy is going awry and is going to fail and everything. So to end on a lighter note, I want to ask you something regarding your work, right? You have written a couple of books. The Patan Unarmed, Cultivating Democracy. You've written the Sari. This is this beautiful book right here. And Why India Votes. Which of these studies, I would say, was your favorite and why?
You can't choose between children. I can't tell you which is, but every one of them, I suppose, like children and their mother, each of them has taught me something quite profound about the world. But I'll tell you the one thing that I think runs through them, which obviously they're all my books, and I've learned by writing them, I have learned something about the nature of politics. And this is the good thing, and this is also a good thing about democracy. At the end of the day, whether it is an anti-colonial movement like the Khuday Khidmatgars, which is what the first book was about,
Patan Unarmed.
which is, or whether it is about democracy or why people vote, or why Indian women choose to wear the sari, even though the whole world thinks that's a bizarre costume. At the end of the day, and we had such wonderful discussions about this in our seminars in our course, that at the end of the day, the agency is with us. It is, each of us has agency, of course, but in order to make it effective, the only way to be effective person in this world is to learn to work with others, right? If we learn to build solidarities with other people, then the power of collective action is what changes things. So this year has been an interesting year of elections because the collective voice of people have spoken everywhere, right? You give your mandate. But it's also, shown us the Sri Lankan government that won the election. It's a government that's come out of a union movement in Sri Lanka, right? People knew that unionizing the workforce and bargaining for better livelihoods, better terms and conditions is something that every working person understands to be a good thing. And when those people went into formal politics and formed a political party and fought the elections, they won because people realized that, they are not just working for their self-interests. They're working for a collective project, a common project, a public good that everybody can. And it's our job, and, all my studies have taught me this, and every day teaches me this, that if you can create common cause with people you don't already know, but you identify a common purpose and are able to organize collectively, whether it is saving democracy, whether it is changing your government, whether it is making a different kind of economic logic to our society's work, and most importantly, whether it is putting pressures on governments to deal with climate change. all of these will only happen through collective action. And I think we have the ingredients for that. It's just up to us to do it.
Exactly. This is one of the most profound things that I really understood during our seminars and during the course of political anthropology. I was like, okay, really, like when it comes, at the end of the day, right, the political power, it is based on the will of the majority, or let's say a big number of people doing a collective action together, right? Deciding to protest something, deciding to vote for something, deciding to change something in their societies. Although we do get a bit apathetic, right? Sometimes we get disappointed with politics and we try to distance ourselves from it. I think this is a good moment to call people into action, to take charge for the things that they believe in and for the things that they really want to change in their societies. Right?
Let me I'm sorry, it's a pessimistic postscript, but I sort of feel it has to be said. This year has also seen millions of people protest about the genocide in Gaza all over the world. Right? That was collective action. People did protest. They made their voices heard. They went out on rainy Saturdays throughout the year to go and say, not in our name, not with our money. We are the taxpayers who are paying for those weapons. We are not going to allow this to happen to children, to women, to Palestinians in general. And it got us nowhere. Nothing changed. So it has also been a very dispiriting year for collective action on this issue, where you also realize when governments get this powerful and this swollen with their importance, they feel they can get away literally with murder, then you think, how do you organize collective action? And I'll tell you, it's really made me think whether it is the genocide in Gaza, whether it is a critique of the economy, whether it is about immigration, which Europe is so worried about. I think at the heart, the one thing that ties all of these together is a lack of historical understanding. Europe needs to understand its history. It needs to learn its history. If you knew Europe's colonial history, as everybody in Latin America and Africa and Asia knows, because they were the continents that were colonized, then you can't. If you knew that history, you would understand why immigration works, that exploitation is continuing in post-colonial context. If you knew the history of Europe from the beginning of the 20th century up to the creation of Israel and what has happened since 1945, then the genocide in Gaza and why one should be protesting it is also evident. But you need to have that historical knowledge. A lot of people who are comfortable with the status quo and only get angry when it's their personal interest that is affected is because they don't understand the world like this. And so, yes, collective action is important, but historical education for large parts of the dominant first world also is important.
Professor, thank you very, very much. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I've really enjoyed our conversation throughout the whole course, throughout the whole term. It was very nice meeting you here in your office. I hadn't recorded a podcast with someone in 3 months, so to have you...
You haven't got rusty, because we kept you so busy in seminars where you were such a fantastic participant. That's the only reason I agreed to do this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
very, very much. Popull, Llafe të LIRA mbështeten nga European Endowment for Democracy, një nga organizatat më të mëdha që mbështesin projekte të reja në Europë, kështu që ndiqini ato për gjitha të rejat dhe për mbështetje të mundshme për projektet tuaja të mëdha. E po ashtu, Llafe të LIRA mbështetet edhe nga A2 Digital World. Nëse jeni të interesuar për zgjidhje totale për botën tuaj digjitale që lidhet me biznese, me organizata, me firma, me çfarë do qoftë kjo, kontaktoni A2 Digital World dhe ato do ju zgjidhin shumë probleme. Nëse ju pëlqejnë ajo që jemi duke bërë, videot
bisedat që i kemi, nëse ju pëlqejnë temat që i trajtojmë, të ftuarit të cilat i marrim në studio dhe doni të na mbështesni, atëherë na kontaktoni në rrjetet tona sociale ose edhe në emailin ton zyrtar që duhet të jetë diku këtu poshtë në video. Ju faleminderit për gjithë mbështetjen e deri tanishme dhe shihemi në episodat tjera. Llafe LIRA.